So, okay, as we're going forward now, I want to ask you guys, and this is for the audience too. I'm going to put this in the comment section. What has been your personal experiences with understanding grace more and more in your life? So, like, how did you start off? What was your first thoughts on grace? And then how has it developed over the years?
I would say starting off in Arminianism, more specifically with Pentecostal charismatic theology. I always knew that God was gracious, and I knew that it was by the grace of God that I was saved. That never changed. I think what changed was the history of grace. You know, because I always saw it from the cross, and then from there, you know, I kind of, you know, read my Bible. But when I started really digging into Ephesians and Romans, I began to see that it was something that goes even further back. You know, before God created anything, he was gracious to me personally, you know, through election.
Mm-hmm.
So election was that doctrine that helped me to look back and understand that God chose me, not because of me or because I chose him or because I came to my senses, but that God, through his sovereign will, chose me. So then I had to renovate my whole theology because that went against everything I believed, you know. So and then I saw the cross differently. I saw that it was actually applied to me personally as a believer. And so for me, it went from seeing the cross and believing that act on the cross was through the love of God. I can't remember Sinclair Ferguson's take on it, but he says something like that the cross isn't the cause to God's love towards us, but that
I got
God,
you right here.
Yeah.
I got you right here.
Go ahead.
We watched the same one. It's funny. I came in today and he was watching the same sermon that I text you about.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I text him about
quick, if you could
a couple days ago or whatever. So people have a tendency. Okay, so let me start off with first. Sinclair says on people misunderstanding grace. He says God does not show grace to us because Christ died for us. Jesus died for us because God showed grace to us. So then he goes on to say, people have a tendency to look at God in the Old Testament. Oh, no, this is my own thoughts. My bad. Let me give you my own thoughts on that. It's just people have a tendency to look at God in the Old Testament as the God of wrath or law, and in the New Testament as the God of grace or love. Like the Father only pours out wrath, and Jesus only brings grace. One thing we got to remember is that Jesus said that no one comes to the Son unless the Father has granted them faith to do so. God has to give you the grace before you can come to regeneration, and then you can come to faith. So we need to understand that grace always comes from God, and especially God the Father.
Right. So for me, it was the love of God that was the cause to Christ being crucified to save.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so for me, that was a little different.
I would agree with that because I definitely come from the same.
For God so loved the world that he gave.
Yeah,
you know?
I definitely come from the same people group that says Jesus shows us grace, or God shows us grace because Jesus died for us. And it's like, no. He showed us grace first, and Jesus died for us, and he still shows us grace.
And he did show grace on the cross.
Yeah, that's what I'm
saying. It helps us to
first.
It helps us to look further back into that place where it was just the triune God, you know, the covenant of redemption. You know
it's a question of why did the Son come? It's not just grace that it shows up when he comes, but grace is part of the planning of it. And, you know, I think too, you're talking about love, and I think one of the dangers of just focusing on the solas in exclusion to other things is you could talk about grace all day and not mention love, but he does show us love, and grace is the outpouring of his love to people that don't deserve it. Like you and I should be getting God's wrath. He doesn't give us that. What does he give us instead? Love. Well, he does that because he is fundamentally a God of love, and he is a God then who delights in showing grace so that we see the full range of his character. He doesn't, you know, of course he still shows wrath, so you see that the holiness side of it in judging sin, but I mean, it really, the contrast of those two things just and I'm channeling Romans 9 a little bit, but it magnifies the character of God and just highlights how wonderful He is. I like what my friend Natalie said, that her first thought of grace is, as a child, what you say before you eat. I'm down with that. So say
I was literally going to say that.
Yeah, she stole your joke. She's quicker than you.
Right.
Let me answer my question from earlier though. When I said about my understanding of grace evolving over the years, of course, when I was younger, I just thought grace was praying over my food. Did you say grace? That was just a common phrase growing up. Make sure you say grace. And then it was like later on, I started to understand it a little bit more. I wasn't really in church so much like by choice. It was more forced. So then I looked at God's grace as like, oh, that's His love. That's the favor. Because I was raised in charismatic churches, Pentecostal background. So then I understood God's grace as favor, and even understanding favor was a little skewed. I just thought like favor was more like, oh, that's God's favoritism. I got all these blessings in my life. And then later on, I became saved, and I came back to Christ, however you want to put it. I was like 20 years old, and I started reading the Bible more, and my grandfather put it very simple. He said, grace is getting what you don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what you do deserve. And that stuck with me for a long time until I started to read the scriptures more, and I understood that grace is even deeper than that. And grace is also what the guy was talking about earlier, where it's God is gracing you to be able to do the things that He says He wants us to do. So it's like what Augustine's prayer, he says, command what you will and grant
what you command.
Yeah.
Command what you will, grant what you command.
Grant what you command.
Which really made Pelagius angry.
It made him mad.
Yeah,
we didn't even get to talk about that. I put
that
in the thing today.
What happened?
I know.
We went right from early church to Reformation. I am upset.
Yeah. But it made him mad because it's so true. Like, we not only need God to command us what He wants us to do, but we need the grace to do what He commands us to do.
Right.
So understanding grace, even as far as that, it's not just something that's shown to me, or like something I receive though I don't deserve it. It is also something I'm empowered with. We become empowered with grace, and Jesus was full of grace as well as truth.
I think another good thing to mention, and maybe we should have started here a little bit more, is even when we come into the scriptures and studying the scriptures, let's just distinguish too between the word grace and the concept grace, right? There are a lot of scripture passages that deal with the concept of grace, but you're not going to find the word grace. I mean, I think, Hosea is a fantastic story about grace. Hosea being told to take his wife back, who was a harlot, who was a prostitute. It parallels God loving and taking back Israel. I could be wrong, but I don't think the word grace is used at all in Hosea. But I mean, the concept is there. The concept is in the prophets when you start talking about the new covenant and what God's going to do to redeem His people. I mean, there's a lot of stories in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that deal with issues of grace and what grace looks like and what the sinner redeemed by grace is going to look like, but not necessarily using the word. I guess what I'm saying is you can't just take a concordance, look up the word grace, and say, hey, now I've learned everything there is in Scripture to learn about grace.
Yeah.